Good morning and welcome to Morning Scoop for Tuesday, May 3rd. This is your daily Buckeye fix. I'm Tom Orr. The Notre Dame game is in 124 days, the game against Michigan in 208 days. Before we get into the topic of today's show, we wanted to make sure you knew that this week is the start of one of the big annual traditions on the Ohio State recruiting beat. Mark Givler, Kevin Noon on their Southern Swing, which is close to 2 weeks on the road, evaluating, interviewing, just getting to know some of the best high school football players from around the southern part of the country. You can find all that content at Buckeye Scoop, so make sure you check that out, and we will definitely have those guys on the Morning Scoop later on this week to discuss some of the stuff they've learned already on that trip. Wednesday, the Buckeyes are also going to find out if they landed another one of their top offensive line targets, Austin Siereveld. He's announcing his decision Wednesday afternoon. Tony Gerdeman will be there to cover it for us. Tony is also my guest this morning. What an exciting week for him. Tony, thanks for being here.
It is an exciting week, Tom. Anytime I get a chance to show up on the Morning Scoop, it makes my day.
All right, makes your day. Well, always nice to make your day this early in the day too. That's sets you up for a real good, exciting day all around. And we are actually going to hold off on all that recruiting chat that we just talked about. We'll do that a little later on in the week. Today, though, we're going to be talking about this year's team instead. So this is part 2 of our deep dive on the 2 deep for this year's Ohio State team. Today, we're going to be talking about the offensive line and tight ends. The line to me is really interesting because it seems like the first string is like pretty much set, and then the backups are by and large like totally up in the air. So let's start with the starters, who are the top 5 guys right now. And, I guess among those top 5 guys, is there one that you think could get jumped before the Notre Dame game kicks off, or are those 5 pretty much set in your mind?
Yeah, let's just run through the starting 5 right now. You got Paris Johnson at left tackle, Donovan Jackson at left guard, Luke Whippler at center, Matt Jones at right guard, and DeJuan Jones at right tackle. And really, will any of those guys get jumped? You have to look at what are you expecting from each of those guys. And I don't see Luke Whippler is a returning starter. Matt Jones is essentially a returning starter. DeJuan Jones, obviously a returning starter at right tackle. Paris Johnson, returning starter, but moving positions, I would expect everybody to hold fast. And you look at the newest guy, Donovan Jackson, he might have the highest upside of anybody, including Paris Johnson. And if it's not Donovan Jackson, who has been entrenched there from, the first day of winter workouts, basically, then who would it be? And we'll talk about that, I guess, in a little bit. But I don't think any of those guys, they're obviously all have to continue to work and yada, 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 if you will. But I think those 5 are pretty firm right now. And I think that's kind of a good thing because they get to gel, they get to build that cohesion and camaraderie, and that will help them once the games actually start kicking off.
And everything we heard from Ryan Day and Kevin Wilson this spring was very much they're comfortable with their top 5. They're happy with their top 5. And then the question is more, how do they feel about the guys behind them? Because it feels like there's maybe 1 or 2 other guys who they're pretty comfortable with, and one of them was hurt all spring, so you kind of put an asterisk on that one. So without having a bunch of other guys right behind them that they're equally comfortable with, that probably eliminates some of that positional battle for a starting job. But who are the guys that you think right now, right behind those starters, the 1 to 2-ish guys who they talked about being pretty comfortable with right now as well?
Yeah, you have Enoch Vamahi, who is a 4th-year guy at this point, who has experienced playing at guard and tackle, can probably do whatever you need him to, and in a short span, maybe in a long span as well. And then also Josh Fryer, who was a 3-star recruit, and then pretty quickly, maybe as a redshirt freshman, began to emerge as a second teamer and can also play guard or tackle, probably a guard, but in a pinch can do whatever you need, just like Vamahi. And so I think those 2, that's your 6 and 7. The 8th guy, it's unfortunate this spring you mentioned the injuries, because you get to the spring game and there's no Ben Chrisman, there's no Zen Michalski, Trey LaRue was out, he had a boot on. So some of these guys where it was time for them to take that next step, like these second-year guys like Michalski and Ben Chrisman, you miss some spring and you don't have that opportunity. And you don't really get a great look at who you have. And then you see somebody like true freshman George Fitzpatrick out there at left tackle in the spring game, and it really catches your eye. And you start to wonder, do they have something here? Is he a guy that can just take that momentum but it's just one spring, and trying to fall into or work your way into the two deep as a true freshman at Ohio State is very difficult because there are a lot of guys ahead of you. However, I don't know that that's the case with this Ohio State team, where there are a bunch of guys, because they're almost all unproven, and there's injury histories, and I think there's doubts about a lot of the guys in that depth chart.
Yeah, it does feel like after those, 6 to 7 guys we talked about, it is like anyone's guess in terms of there's a bunch of those guys from the 2020 recruiting class who, outside of Luke Whippler, who started, and Fryer, who they seem pretty, Paris Johnson as well. But that was a big class, and there's like 3 of those guys who really have not gotten a chance to play because, injuries and have been a big part of that. But, the 2021 class, you have seen Donovan Jackson. You have not seen a lot of Ben Chrisman yet. 2022, those guys are just getting on campus. You don't normally expect those 2022s to make an immediate impact, but who else do you think can earn their way? I mean, you kind of ran down a bunch of the names there. Who else do you think could be on their way to earning their way into the circle of trust before the start of the season, or with the injuries setting guys back and all that kind of stuff? Is that going to be a really tough thing for them to do? And if that's the case, then what do? You can't go into the year feeling good about 6 offensive linemen.
Yeah, I was disappointed that we didn't get to see more from Zen Michalski, who is one of those guys with the late bloomer in high school with the high upside that you take not necessarily a flyer on, but that he's going to be this project. But eventually, if everything hits, he's athletic, he's 6'7", and he put on a bunch of weight to become an offensive lineman. He grew into it, and you want to see the blossoming that happens in the spring. And unfortunately, we didn't get to see that. But a guy like even Jacob James, who has been the number 2 center, but is he really? Like Matt Jones would probably be the number 2 center. You wonder if he can get into a position where if something happened to Luke Whippler, could he make a move to where I can step in at center, Matt Jones, you can stay at guard. You don't need to move everybody around. But that's also the blessing of the versatility they have in that starting lineup, where Paris Johnson has played guard. Donovan Jackson is a guard but can play tackle. Matt Jones can play anywhere on the interior. And then you've got Enoch Vamahi, Josh Fryer, these guys that can go anywhere. So even though they may only have 7, they kind of have like 9. But when you lose one of those guys, that 9 becomes 6 or 7, where if you lose one guy, you kind of lose 3 at times. So that's why can any of these other guys step up? Ben Chrisman was highly thought of, and I think he's another guy that this is his second year, and maybe I'll be interested to see who you hear about over the summer, and then who you see work their way up from number 3 right tackle to number 2 left tackle in the fall. And that's a guy that the momentum builds, where then the coaches talk about, I feel good, we can put this guy in a game right now. I'm comfortable with that. It's just you've got a solid 5, so it makes it a little more difficult.
Yeah, and for the guys who missed the spring, you still have that opportunity over the summer and into fall camp to earn your way in there. So that's going to be a real interesting storyline to watch. I mean, Ryan Day talked about the offensive line depth being maybe his single biggest concern earlier this spring. So I'm sure we will not be the only ones watching that. Ryan Day and Justin Fry and Kevin Wilson and the whole rest of the coaching staff will have a pretty close eye on that one as well. Another position that we need to talk about contractually, and because here we are in the year of the tight end. The tight end. The Buckeyes lost only one player, Jeremy Ruckert, who ended up getting picked by the Jets in the 3rd round of the draft. Mark Pantoni tweeted out a picture of Jeremy Ruckert as a little kid, like Christmas morning, wearing one of those. It looked like the old, Jets jersey you would get out of the Sears catalog way back in the day. I don't think Jeremy Ruckert is old enough to have been around for the Sears catalog, but the little plastic helmet and all that kind of stuff. Grew up a Jets fan, now gets to play for the Jets. That's pretty cool. What is then maybe a little less cool for Ohio State is now you don't have Jeremy Ruckert in your tight end room. So then what? You would sort of think that everyone else who's back from last year should just sort of okay, everyone take one step up the ladder on the depth chart, and very easy to project. But with the way sort of some of the personnel moves and some of the injuries we had, we saw this spring, it doesn't seem like that's necessarily going to be the case where it's just this clean, clear cut. Okay, everyone one step up the depth chart.
Yeah, it's the tight ends this year. I think it's almost like tight end a la carte. Like, what do you feel like right now? Like, you just, but here's this one. Just take this one. And you want to put them together with another one. You don't have to buy the entire meal. You can just get what you want. Tom, yes, it is the year of the tight end, but this is also Ohio State. This is tight end U. And as one of my favorite stats, which I tweeted out last year and then tweeted out again this weekend, is going back to at least 1996. Any tight end that signs with Ohio State out of high school and then stays at tight end or and doesn't, get injured or move positions has cashed an NFL paycheck. That's obviously getting drafted. That's undrafted free agency. That's getting an invite to camp and getting 10 grand or whatever to come to camp. Like, if you go to Ohio State to play tight end and you stay at tight end, the NFL will see you. The NFL will, you'll be able to at least suit up once for an NFL team in some form or fashion. So I don't get all of the, people with the doubts about Ohio State never using the tight end, blah, blah, blah. They use them just as they are intended to. And Tom, yes, they can use these guys any number of ways, which is a blessing, but you wonder if it's also going to become a curse because it's the old, all of these guys are a jack of one trade, basically, or two, not all. And they're looking to build all of them into a master, each of them in their own ways. And they have different skill sets, different sizes, different shapes. And it becomes one of these things where what do we need in this situation, I think, and who are the best two for it and who are the best two for this situation. So I think it's going to take a lot of work on the coaches' parts to know what their personnel does best and what they're most effective at, and then making sure that they're out there on the field when that stuff is called or calling to their strengths. And really, like I said, they can all do different things. So the defense has to pay attention to that, but the offense also has to pay attention to that. And it can limit you in some ways, but you just have to make sure the right guys are in at the right times.
And, it feels like to me there's like a top three guys, and then there's a couple other guys who are a little younger and coming along, but the top three feel like it's Cade Stover, Joe Royer, and Mitch Rossi in some order, and some, in a little bit situationally, like you talked about there. Mitch Rossi obviously missed the spring, but, is expected to be back and healthy this fall. And then, you've got Sam Hart, you've got Bennett Christian, who I have seen called Christian Bennett so many times that it's just a matter of time before I call him Christian Bennett on this show. But Bennett Christian, you've got those two younger guys. Is that kind of, it feels like it's almost, instead of a two deep, it's almost like it's like this is a two-tier depth chart where it's like, here's, 1A, 1B, 1C, depending on the situation, and then here's 2A, 2B. Is that kind of how you see this shaking out right now, or?
Yeah, and I'd throw G. Scott in that top group as well.
Oh, G. Scott, obviously, yes, sorry.
Yeah. So it's like those four, and Sam Hart still, you look at, he's 1 year behind Joe Royer, and if you look at what Joe Royer did last year, and he played about 40 snaps on offense, played, I think, in 3 games on offense, that's, I don't expect to see Sam Hart much. I wouldn't be surprised if we see Bennett Christian maybe a little bit more, just because he is bigger. He's like 6'6", 250. He looks like you would like your tight ends to look. But really, true freshman tight ends don't really necessarily get on the field a lot for Ohio State. And when you've got Cade Stover and Mitch Rossi as that fallback H to do different things, and Joe Royer and G. Scott, they want to use these guys so that they can get better, and they are able to do some things. I don't know that there's much room for Sam Hart and Bennett Christian in the 2022. And a nice little way to remember Bennett Christian, Tom, the name is alphabetical. It's B before C, Bennett Christian. That's how I have remembered it, and it has worked flawlessly for me so far, as I say flawlessly wrong. But I think it's those four, and I wrote about them this weekend. Like, whoever can do the most, like we talk about these guys being niche players at this point, whoever stops becoming that niche player can become that second tight end. And I think, Cade Stover is obviously the first, but can G. Scott become the blocker, an undersized blocker? Can Joe Royer do the things you need your second tight end to do, including catching the ball, but he needs to become a better blocker? Who can do that and be that second inline tight end that you need? That guy can really then blossom and become the number 2 guy.
Yeah, I liked your mnemonic to remember Bennett Christian being alphabetical. G. Scott's name is alphabetical, and I forgot it completely. So that was doesn't that apparently doesn't work for me, but hopefully it works for you at home, dear listener. Yes, G. Scott, who was the leading receiver among all the tight ends in the spring game. Yes, that is not one that I should have left out as I was sort of running through the depth chart there. They made a run at Oklahoma tight end Austin Stogner in the portal earlier in the offseason. He ended up with his old Oklahoma quarterback Spencer Rattler at South Carolina instead. Do you see the tight end or offensive line as places where they might try to bring another guy in this summer, or do you think they've got what they've got, and they're kind of comfortable with that?
Well, I think they went to the transfer portal from offense to defense and got Cade Stover. So, I think that was maybe their solution. Like, they didn't necessarily want to have to do that and pull Cade Stover over from defense, but really when you look at what Cade Stover eventually wanted to do, he decided on offense. So I think that probably takes care of the tight end. If we hear that they are looking into the portal at tight end again, I don't think that's a great sign in terms of what they have, what they think they have. With the offensive line, it just comes down again to the situation at quarterback. You're gonna have somebody come in and you're gonna tell them on the offensive line out of the portal, we don't have a starting spot for you. Sure, you can compete. Everybody can compete for your starting spot. We have an opportunity for you to be the swing third tackle or something of that nature. And then you also lay out the fact that look at each of these seasons and how often that third tackle played, and it was a lot. Or we can get you a tight end jersey like we did with Donovan Jackson last year. Like, there is still very much a role for the third tackle in this Ohio State offense. But is it going to be enough to lure somebody who is looking for, something more, something bigger? And Ohio State certainly gives you something bigger in terms of playing time. However, it gives you something less. And so then it just becomes what that person wants. And that person is probably also able to go to other big programs and find a starting spot instead of just, well, we have this kind of tiny role that we've used in the past. It doesn't guarantee we'll use it again in the future. But if you come here, we'll try to figure something out.
Yeah, in the past when they have brought someone in, it has been they have a hole on the offensive line and they bring in a Jonah Jackson to fix that particular hole. They don't really have a hole on the first team, and so bringing in someone to be the third tackle or something like that, it's like it's easier to bring in a fourth string quarterback who knows they're going to be a fourth string quarterback than to bring in a second string quarterback. This is, if you're coming in as the fifth offensive lineman, well, that's one thing. If you're coming in as the eighth or ninth offensive lineman, that's potentially a very different thing. So yeah, it does feel like I like your analogy of Cade Stover being in the internal transfer portal. Like that feels like how they kind of solved that problem. The depth at tight end is not really an issue now. The depth at offensive line is an issue, but that's not necessarily when you can fix, given what the people in the portal are probably looking for. So we'll continue to keep an eye on that over the summer. We will also, of course, continue to keep an eye on the Southern Swing recruiting that we mentioned off the top of the show. Mark Givler and Kevin Noon driving all around the southern United States this week and early next week to cover all sorts of great prospects, meeting with a ton of people, watching a ton of practices, all sorts of great content. They will be churning that all out at BuckeyeScoop.com. We will again try and have them on, one or both of them, a little later on this week to talk about it on one of these morning scoop shows. But make sure you check out they also do good podcasts themselves. They don't just come on this show. They do their own podcasts as well. Mark Givler does Gives in the Bank with Bill the Bank Green. Kevin Noon does the Big Me Kickoff. Alex Gleitman does Around the Oval. Tony does the Buckeye Weekly podcast with me. You can find those all by searching Buckeye Scoop wherever you find this show. Just type in Buckeye Scoop, hit search, and all those shows will pop up. You can subscribe right there. You can also leave us a 5-star rating and review, which will help other folks find those shows as well. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.